Watch the flanks. The fog is thick, but they might be close.
Yeah, Lieutenant. I hear movement ahead.
By Christmas morning, the fog that had once sealed the Ardennes was gone. The frozen stillness of the forest gave way to the ceaseless growl of engines and the crack of artillery. The Allies, at last, could see. And once they could see, they struck with precision that shattered what remained of the German offensive. Across the shattered landscape, Patton's Third Army pushed north toward Bastogne in what many would later call one of the most remarkable maneuvers of the war. In just 48 hours, Patton's columns pivoted 90 degrees, a logistical feat that stunned even his staff. His tanks plowed through ice and snow, guided now by clear skies and the long shadows of winter sun. On December 26, forward elements of the 37th Tank Battalion reached the besieged paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division. The men inside Bastogne, half-starved and frostbitten, greeted the sight with tears and disbelief. "We thought we were done," one soldier remembered. Then the fog lifted, and with it, everything changed. Elsewhere, the German drive toward the Meuse River was unraveling. Kampfgruppe Pieper, the tip of the spear for the 1st SS Panzer Division, had been trapped in a tightening pocket near La Gleize. Their tanks were immobilized, their fuel gone, their infantry decimated. Surrounded by American artillery and air attacks, Pieper gave the order to abandon the vehicles. Under cover of night, his men slipped away on foot through the snow. Hundreds of them, exhausted, frost-bitten, and hunted. The armored spearhead that had once terrified the Western Front was now a broken column of survivors. Further north, Sepp Dietrich's 6th Panzer Army faltered against a resurgent Allied line. Allied aircraft strafed the roads relentlessly, destroying columns faster than replacements could arrive. What had begun as a coordinated strike now collapsed into chaos. Units scattered, commands fragmented, radio silence pervasive. The fog that once hid their advance had also concealed how thinly stretched their strength truly was. By December 28th, Hitler's offensive was effectively dead. But within German headquarters, reality was slow to sink in. At Adlerhorst, Hitler still clung to the illusion that the offensive could be renewed. He blamed the weather, not as an unpredictable natural force, but as a betrayal. In his view, the fog had lifted too soon, robbing Germany of victory. Rundstedt and Model, more grounded in military logic, urged retreat. They understood that what began as an assault had turned into a battle for survival. Hitler refused. Orders came to hold all ground gained at any cost. That cost would be catastrophic. As the new year approached, Allied pressure intensified. Eisenhower, seeing the enemy's overextension, ordered a pincer movement to crush the Bulge from north and south. British forces under Montgomery closed in from one side, while Patton's divisions and U.S. First Army hammered from the other. The German salient, once an 80-mile thrust, shrank daily. By early January 1945, the fog returned briefly, a final haunting echo of the opening days. But this time, it no longer favored the Germans. The Allies, equipped with superior logistics and air coordination, moved confidently even without clear skies. Radar-equipped bombers and forward observers allowed them to strike through partial cover. The once dreaded mist now worked against the retreating Wehrmacht, concealing Allied ambushes and artillery preparations. In one recorded incident near Mannheim, an entire German column stumbled into an unseen American tank destroyer ambush. The first shot shattered a lead Panther. The rest tried to reverse, colliding in panic. When the fog cleared minutes later, the road was filled with wreckage. The illusion of control, the belief that weather could be commanded or luck could substitute for planning, was gone. By January 8, 1945, Hitler finally authorized withdrawal. It was too late. The Germans had lost over 80,000 men, killed, wounded, or captured. Nearly 600 tanks and assault guns lay destroyed or abandoned. The Wehrmacht's last major reserve in the West had been annihilated. For the Allies, the cost was staggering as well. Over 75,000 casualties, entire towns obliterated, and vast tracts of Belgium turned to ruins. Yet the psychological balance of the war had shifted irreversibly. The Germans had gambled everything on surprise, on weather, on faith, and lost. In the days that followed, Allied commanders toured the battlefield. Eisenhower stood over the wreckage of burnt panzers and noted quietly to his staff. They believed the fog would save them. Instead, it blinded them. In the forests, as snow began to fall again, soldiers from both sides stumbled upon the frozen remains of those who had vanished into the fog days earlier. Patrols lost. Medics missing, entire squads entombed in white silence. The Ardennes was once again quiet, but the fog that had rolled through those hills left more than destruction behind. It left a legend of misjudgment, of human blindness amid natural power. For the German command, it was the end of initiative on the Western Front. Never again would the Wehrmacht mount an offensive of that scale. The fog had been their last ally, their last illusion, and it had turned against them. The battle was over, but its consequences, military, psychological, and moral, were only beginning to unfold. By the winter of 1944, the Third Reich was bleeding. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army surged westward with unstoppable momentum, tearing through Poland. In the west, Allied divisions had broken out from Normandy, liberated Paris, and pushed the Wehrmacht back toward the borders of Germany itself. Yet, despite the crumbling state of his empire, Adolf Hitler still believed in a single, decisive counterstroke, one that could fracture the Allied advance and perhaps force the Western powers to negotiate. That plan would become the Ardennes Offensive, known later to history as the Battle of the Bulge. The logic seemed sound in Hitler's mind. Strike hard through the Ardennes, a region Allied commanders had dismissed as impenetrable in winter, and drive all the way to Antwerp. Splitting the British and American armies, he reasoned, could destabilize their alliance. The surprise attack would buy Germany time to redeploy forces eastward and perhaps turn the war's tide. To execute this, 3 German armies assembled under Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt and Walter Model, hardened veterans of defensive warfare now tasked with launching an ambitious offensive. Over 200,000 men, 1,000 tanks, and hundreds of artillery batteries gathered along the western frontier. But they faced a problem more formidable than Allied strength: the weather. Winter had arrived like a steel curtain. The Ardennes, a dense forest of dark pines and rolling hills, was smothered under layers of ice and snow. Visibility was collapsing by the day. For weeks, Allied bombers had ruled the skies, their dominance a constant threat to any German ground movement. But now, in mid-December, the fog rolled in thick and unrelenting. To the Germans, this was a miracle. To their enemies, it was blindness. The Luftwaffe meteorological staff reported sustained low cloud cover, ground-level fog, and zero operational ceiling. In simple terms, the skies were shut. No reconnaissance, no air support, no bombers. Allied eyes in the sky were blindfolded by nature itself. Inside Hitler's headquarters at the Adlerhorst command complex, reports of the fog were met with satisfaction. It was seen as providence, a divine ally cloaking German divisions massing in the woods. Commanders believed the weather would last only long enough for the attack to succeed before clearing for the Luftwaffe to resume support. Few realized how that same fog would distort movement, silence radios, and twist direction. It would become both shield and snare. As midnight approached on December 15th, German panzer columns began to move. Tanks crept forward with headlights dimmed, engines muffled beneath blankets of mist. Infantry pushed bicycles and supply wagons down narrow trails, compasses trembling in the cold. The offensive was scheduled to begin at dawn. The Allies, meanwhile, saw nothing. Their intelligence officers were confident the Germans lacked the manpower for any large-scale attack. "The enemy is finished," read one optimistic report from U.S. First Army headquarters. Commanders allowed their men to rest, to regroup for Christmas. The Ardennes sector was considered quiet, a place where exhausted divisions were sent to recover. The fog ensured that illusion held until the very last hour, when German artillery finally opened fire before dawn on December 16th. The blast shattered the calm like a hammer on glass. Thousands of shells tore through the mist, obliterating Allied positions along an 80-mile front. Communications collapsed almost instantly. The world vanished into white chaos. But within that chaos lay something deeper, a dangerous misreading of the fog itself. To the German command, it was a gift from nature. To the Allies, it was an enemy veil. Neither side yet understood that it would soon turn against them both. In the first hours of the Ardennes offensive, German confidence was absolute. The fog was dense enough to hide entire armored columns. The Americans, caught off guard, struggled to organize resistance. Roads vanished into whiteness. Command posts were severed from their units. For a fleeting moment, Hitler's gamble seemed to be working. Field Marshal Walter Model's officers reported maximum concealment achieved. In the valleys near Eifel and Schnee-Eifel, German panzers advanced without Allied aircraft sighting them. Convoys slipped through the murk. Headlights dimmed to pinpricks. Soldiers said the fog made them invisible. A ghost army moving through the trees. At dawn, the German spearhead, Kampfgruppe Piper of the 1st SS Panzer Division, thundered down narrow Belgian roads. Behind them came mechanized infantry, their boots crunching ice. The plan was to strike fast toward the Meuse River, break through to Antwerp, and trap 4 Allied armies. But the same fog that shielded them also blinded them. Maps were outdated. Roads had shifted, bridges destroyed. Visibility fell to less than 50 meters. Tank commanders leaned out of turrets, straining to see. Entire columns veered off course, colliding in the confusion. Radio signals flickered. Reports of friendly armor blocking the route piled up. German tactical doctrine, built on speed and precision, began to falter in the gray. Meanwhile, at 1st U.S. Army headquarters in Spa, Belgium, disbelief reigned. How could such a massive offensive emerge from nowhere? The fog explained it. Allied reconnaissance flights had been grounded for days. No photos, no intercepts, no indication of massed German armor. What had seemed like winter quiet was actually the calm before the storm. Still, Allied commanders believed the attack was localized. They underestimated its scale, assuming small German spoiling actions. The fog muted explosions, distorted sound, and made it impossible to gauge front-line distances. Radio operators struggled to triangulate positions. Artillery officers fired blindly into the mist, unsure of targets. By December 18th, the German advance had carved a wedge into the Allied line. The Bulge that would give the battle its name. In Berlin, propaganda officers celebrated, declaring that the Western Front is cracking. For a brief moment, even Hitler believed destiny had turned in his favor. But the fog was already changing sides. As the offensive deepened, supply lines stretched thin. Fuel convoys lost their way in the mist. Trucks slid into ditches. Bridges collapsed under frozen weight. Abandoned vehicles littered the roadsides like skeletons. Tank crews siphoned fuel from wrecks just to move a few kilometers forward. Without air support, German units were trapped in a moving shadow, unable to see or coordinate beyond the next ridge. Allied units, though disoriented, began to adapt. American engineers laid defensive minefields under cover of the fog, moving unseen. Artillery spotters relied on sound ranging and map fire, crude but effective. Infantry units used the fog to reposition and ambush German patrols that had lost their bearings. And then came the turning point of awareness. Allied meteorologists at SHAPE headquarters predicted a break in the weather. When the fog lifted, they said, Allied air power would return, and with it, the full weight of modern war. To the German command, this forecast never arrived. Communications with their own weather stations had broken down. They believed the fog would hold for another week. It did not. By December 23rd, the skies began to clear. American P-47 Thunderbolts and RAF Typhoons roared overhead, their engines echoing across the frozen valleys. The fog that had hidden the German offensive now exposed it in brutal detail. Convoys that had once moved unseen were suddenly burning on open roads. Yet the fog's legacy was not finished. Even as daylight returned, pockets of mist clung to the lowlands, concealing Allied counterattacks forming in silence. Entire divisions, once thought shattered, regrouped behind that haze. The German command still believed the fog was their ally. They did not realize it was about to hide an army of their enemies. War, in its purest form, depends on vision. To see the enemy, to aim, to strike. In the Ardennes, vision disappeared. For the German attackers, the fog at first seemed a tactical masterpiece of nature. The thick mist masked movement, muffled sound, and rendered Allied observation posts useless. Infantry crept through frozen pine forests unseen. Tanks rolled down mountain roads like phantoms. Artillery spotters could not locate their own shells' impacts. In those opening days, even the most disciplined Allied units were paralyzed. Not by the enemy, but by blindness itself. But battlefield fog is a double-edged weapon. As it erased the enemy from sight, it also erased the map. German armored formations relied on synchronization, swift advances coordinated by radio and visual markers. In the fog, columns jammed together at crossroads. Vehicles crashed or veered into ditches. Commanders gave orders based on guesses, not bearings. The Wehrmacht's famed precision was undone by confusion. American forces, though scattered, began to exploit this chaos. Small defensive units, sometimes no more than a dozen men, held crossroads and bridges with stubborn resistance. Because the Germans could not see the scale of what opposed them, even isolated American platoons seemed larger than they were. The fog magnified illusions. At Lanzerath, a single U.S. reconnaissance platoon delayed an entire German regiment for nearly a full day. In the whiteness, the enemy believed they were fighting a much larger force. Elsewhere, U.S. artillerymen fired blindly into the mist, using pre-calculated coordinates. Their shells struck columns they couldn't even see. The fog transformed the battlefield into a game of sound and instinct. Machine guns rattled from invisible ridges. Tanks fired at shadows. Men crouched in snowbanks, straining to distinguish the crunch of boots from the crackle of ice. In such conditions, courage meant little. Survival depended on luck and hearing. The tactical brilliance of Hitler's plan, speed, shock, and precision, was suffocated by the very fog that made it possible. The technological angle, when machines were blinded, the Second World War was, in many ways, the first fully mechanized war. Planes, tanks, and radio networks defined its tempo. Yet in the Ardennes, technology bent beneath the weight of weather. The Luftwaffe, already crippled by shortages, was grounded entirely by the fog. Their reconnaissance aircraft, essential for mapping Allied defenses, remained idle. Pilots waited in frozen cockpits for a visibility window that never came. The same mist that blinded Allied planes blinded German ones. But the Allies could afford to wait. Germany could not. On the ground, radio communications suffered. The Ardennes terrain, valleys, ridges, and forests, reflected and absorbed signals unpredictably. The moisture in the fog further degraded transmissions. Messages distorted or vanished altogether. Commanders resorted to dispatch riders and field telephones, slow, unreliable methods for a fast-moving offensive. Tanks, too, struggled. The Panther and Tiger II, masterpieces of engineering, became cumbersome beasts on icy, narrow roads. Without aerial reconnaissance or visual landmarks, armored units had to rely on compass and intuition. Fuel was precious, but wasted as tanks idled for hours, waiting for the fog to clear enough to move. Meanwhile, American radar stations, designed primarily for air defense, found themselves half-blind. The dense fog produced clutter, false echoes, phantom signals that appeared as aircraft or vehicles. Allied operators could not distinguish fact from interference. The Ardennes became a ghost theater of signals and shadows. Yet within this technological paralysis, something new began to emerge. Adaptation, Allied engineers set up mobile radar calibration teams to study atmospheric interference. They realized that fog, dense with water vapor, could distort radar beams. These field lessons, learned amid desperation, would later influence Cold War radar design and early meteorological warfare research. In short, the fog exposed the limits of the modern war machine. It proved that even the most advanced technology of 1944 could be rendered primitive by something as natural as suspended water droplets. The German generals still believed they held the advantage. The weather, after all, had silenced Allied aircraft and hidden their offensive. But inside the mist, their army was losing its shape. Units drifted apart, fuel dwindled, and reports arrived hours late or not at all. Fog had become not an ally, but a trickster, favoring whichever side understood it better. And as German armor slowed to a crawl, the Allied counterforce began to stir behind the same veil, unseen and growing. The human angle, fear in the white silence, for soldiers on both sides. The fog was not weather. It was a living thing. Men spoke of it as if it had intent. It muffled screams, swallowed flares, distorted sound, so that a rifle shot could echo from every direction. Visibility shrank to a few meters. You could hear men moving nearby, breathing, whispering, loading rifles, but never see them. In the American foxholes near Bastogne, troops of the 101st Airborne waited in the eerie stillness, every sense sharpened. One paratrooper wrote later, "You felt the fog in your lungs. You couldn't see your own hands. You were surrounded, but by what? No one knew." German soldiers advancing through the forest felt the same. The whiteness erased rank and purpose. Even seasoned officers lost direction. Patrols disappeared into the mist and never returned. The line between friend and foe dissolved. On several occasions, American and German units unknowingly bivouacked within shouting distance of each other, separated only by the fog. Psychologically, the effect was devastating. The Ardennes became a place of disembodied noise. Engines idling, muffled explosions, boots crunching over ice. Fear multiplied in silence. The fog denied context, and in war, context is survival. Veterans later recalled that it wasn't bullets they feared most, but the unseen. Every shadow was an enemy. Every sound carried the weight of death. The leadership angle. Arrogance and adaptation. In headquarters far from the front, the fog was interpreted not through fear, but through confidence, and that difference proved fatal. At Adler Horst, Hitler's winter headquarters, the Führer's inner circle viewed the weather as divine intervention. Reports from the front confirming complete atmospheric cover only reinforced his conviction that destiny favored Germany. Rundstedt and Model, both professional soldiers, privately doubted the plan's feasibility. They knew terrain, logistics, and timing were working against them. But Hitler's belief in the fog's protective power silenced dissent. This blind faith in chance weather This refusal to see fog as more than a convenient cloak shaped the coming disaster. German field commanders, forbidden from adapting or deviating from orders, pushed their men into impossible conditions. Meanwhile, Allied leadership learned faster. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAF, General Eisenhower and his staff studied meteorological data hourly. When forecasters predicted a break in the weather, they prepared the air forces to strike the instant visibility returned. This difference, belief versus adaptation, defined the leadership contrast. Hitler waited for miracles. Eisenhower prepared for opportunities. When the fog lifted on December 23rd, Allied command unleashed everything it had. Over 1,000 sorties tore into German convoys. Bridges collapsed, fuel dumps ignited, and armor burned in rows along frozen roads. The same mist that had once shielded the German advance now concealed Allied fighter bombers diving out of the clearing sky. German staff officers began to realize the truth. Weather was never an ally. It was an element, indifferent, uncontrollable, and lethal to those who mistook it for favor. The moral and strategic angle, the illusion of control, the fog over the Ardennes became a metaphor for the German war itself. A campaign built on illusion, command detached from reality, and faith in forces beyond understanding. At the human level, soldiers fought and died in confusion. At the strategic level, leaders gambled on luck disguised as planning. The result was a moral unraveling of the German command system. Even after the fog began to clear, Hitler refused to believe his offensive had failed. He blamed cowardice, not circumstance. His generals, stripped of agency, could only watch the collapse unfold. For the Allies, the fog carried a different lesson. That uncertainty could be turned into strategy. Intelligence officers studied how reduced visibility changed movement and morale. They began planning counterattacks that relied on surprise within mist and snow, using the same element that had once concealed their enemy. By the end of December, Allied forces were learning to see through the fog, using instinct, coordination, and raw discipline. German forces, still clinging to a rigid plan, stumbled further into disarray. The moral dimension of the Ardennes was not simply about victory or defeat. It was about perception, about how hubris blinds and how humility adapts. For Hitler, fog was a sign of destiny. For the men who survived it, fog was a reminder that no army, no matter how powerful, commands nature. The fog, once a cloak for the German offensive, now veiled something else entirely. The slow, deliberate movement of Allied forces preparing their counterstrike. And beneath that mist, the balance of the Western Front was about to shift. December 23rd, 1944. Dawn. The Ardennes wakes beneath a sky of pale silver. For the first time in a week, the sun pierces the mist. Frost glitters on the pines. The fog that once sealed the world begins to thin, curling upward in ghostly strands. And as it lifts, the German illusion of dominance lifts with it. Through the clearing haze, the first sounds come. The deep, rising roar of aircraft engines. Then another, then dozens more. Within minutes, the once muted sky is alive with thunder. From the north and west, formations of P-47 thunderbolts and typhoons appear. Dark silhouettes slicing through sunlight. They descend low over the valleys, their targets exposed at last. German armored columns, long stalled and fuel-starved, are caught in the open. Trucks burn where they stand. Tank crews scramble for cover, but there is none. The fog that had hidden them now reveals them like figures on a white stage. The first rockets strike the roads near St. Vith and Houffalize. Within hours, the German spearhead begins to collapse. For 7 days, the fog had been the shield of Wacht am Rhein. Now, it becomes its executioner. The Allied counteroffensive, long delayed by weather, surges forward. Patton's Third Army having pivoted north from Lorraine in an almost superhuman maneuver, strikes toward Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne Division has been encircled for days. Under cover of the final mists, Patton's tanks advance through frozen fields, headlights dimmed, exhaust trailing white against white. German reconnaissance, crippled by chaos, doesn't see them coming. The entire Allied army that Hitler believed scattered and broken is in fact regrouping. Invisible behind the fog, he dismissed as chance. At Bastogne, the fog still clings to the ridges as the siege tightens. Inside the town, paratroopers hold the line, short on ammunition and food. General Anthony McAuliffe's defiant "nuts" reply to a German surrender demand echoes through the ranks. But above them, for the first time since the battle began, they hear the droning hum of C-47 transport planes. The sky has opened. Parachutes bloom like white flowers over the town. Ammunition, rations, medical supplies drifting down through the thinning mist. The fog that once choked their survival now delivers salvation. To the German command, the sudden clarity of the skies is a nightmare. Sepp Dietrich, commanding the 6th Panzer Army, radios in disbelief. Allied air power has returned in force. Fuel convoys are destroyed before reaching the front. Roads, once lifelines, become death traps. By nightfall, the mist fully disperses. Fires light the horizon. The German advance, once a roaring thrust toward Antwerp, slows to a crawl of burning wrecks and isolated units. Across the Ardennes, the transformation is complete. The fog had hidden an army, not of ghosts, but of living, waiting men. Allied divisions that had seemed broken are now converging from every direction. From the north, British XXX Corps closes in. From the south, Patton's armor pushes relentlessly toward Bastogne. To the west, the U.S. 1st and 9th Armies regroup behind hastily reinforced lines. In Berlin, the news filters through late and distorted. Hitler rages at his generals, demanding explanations. How could the Allies regroup so quickly? How could their last chance in the West dissolve overnight? But no one can answer. The truth is simple and devastating. They misread nature. The fog they believed to be providence was only temporary. Their entire strategy had been built upon a weather report. On the ground, the scene is apocalyptic. Roads are choked with wreckage. Burnt-out tanks, overturned half-tracks, dead horses, frozen soldiers. Villages like La Gleize and Stavelot lie in ruins. The once unstoppable Kampfgruppe Piper is trapped and abandoned by its own command. Its fuel exhausted, its men forced to flee on foot. The Ardennes Forest, so recently silent and spectral, now roars with artillery and flame. From the air, Allied pilots describe the sight as surreal. The white snow below stained black and red. Lines of retreating men casting long shadows in the low winter sun. By the night of December 24th, the Germans are no longer advancing. They are surviving. In the fading twilight, one officer of the 2nd Panzer Division writes in his field diary, "The fog was our friend. Now it is our grave. The tide of the Ardennes has turned. The fog, once a symbol of German confidence, now marks the boundary between their last illusion and their final defeat in the West." But as the smoke clears and the skies burn with aircraft trails, another layer of the battle is about to unfold. One not just of soldiers and tanks, but of commanders and consequences. By Christmas morning, the fog that had once sealed the Ardennes was gone. The frozen stillness of the forest gave way to the ceaseless growl of engines and the crack of artillery. The Allies, at last, could see. And once they could see, they struck with precision that shattered what remained of the German offensive. Across the shattered landscape, Patton's Third Army pushed north toward Bastogne, in what many would later call one of the most remarkable maneuvers of the war. In just 48 hours, Patton's columns pivoted 90 degrees, a logistical feat that stunned even his staff. His tanks plowed through ice and snow, guided now by clear skies and the long shadows of winter sun. On December 26th, forward elements of the 37th Tank Battalion reached the besieged paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division. The men inside Bastogne, half-starved and frostbitten, greeted the sight with tears and disbelief. "We thought we were done," one soldier remembered. Then the fog lifted, and with it, everything changed. Elsewhere, the German drive toward the Meuse River was unraveling. Kampfgruppe Peiper, the tip of the spear for the 1st SS Panzer Division, had been trapped in a tightening pocket near La Gleize. Their tanks were immobilized, their fuel gone, their infantry decimated. Surrounded by American artillery and air attacks, Peiper gave the order to abandon the vehicles. Under cover of night, his men slipped away on foot through the snow. Hundreds of them, exhausted, frostbitten, and hunted. The armored spearhead that had once terrified the Western Front was now a broken column of survivors. Further north, Sepp Dietrich's 6th Panzer Army faltered against a resurgent Allied line. Allied aircraft strafed the roads relentlessly, destroying columns faster than replacements could arrive. What had begun as a coordinated strike now collapsed into chaos. Units scattered, commands fragmented, radio silence pervasive. The fog that once hid their advance had also concealed how thinly stretched their strength truly was. By December 28th, Hitler's offensive was effectively dead. But within German headquarters, reality was slow to sink in. At Adlerhorst, Hitler still clung to the illusion that the offensive could be renewed. He blamed the weather, not as an unpredictable natural force, but as a betrayal. In his view, the fog had lifted too soon, robbing Germany of victory. Rundstedt and Model, more grounded in military logic, urged retreat. They understood that what began as an assault had turned into a battle for survival. Hitler refused. Orders came to hold all ground gained at any cost. That cost would be catastrophic. As the new year approached, Allied pressure intensified. Eisenhower, seeing the enemy's overextension, ordered a pincer movement to crush the Bulge from north and south. British forces under Montgomery closed in from one side, while Patton's divisions and U.S. First Army hammered from the other. The German salient, once an 80-mile thrust, shrank daily. By early January 1945, the fog returned briefly, a final haunting echo of the opening days. But this time, it no longer favored the Germans. The Allies, equipped with superior logistics and air coordination, moved confidently even without clear skies. Radar-equipped bombers and forward observers allowed them to strike through partial cover. The once dreaded mist now worked against the retreating Wehrmacht, concealing Allied ambushes and artillery preparations. In one recorded incident near Mannheim, an entire German column stumbled into an unseen American tank destroyer ambush. The first shot shattered a lead Panther. The rest tried to reverse, colliding in panic. When the fog cleared minutes later, the road was filled with wreckage. The illusion of control, the belief that weather could be commanded or luck could substitute for planning, was gone. By January 8, 1945, Hitler finally authorized withdrawal. It was too late. The Germans had lost over 80,000 men, killed, wounded, or captured. Nearly 600 tanks and assault guns lay destroyed or abandoned. The Wehrmacht's last major reserve in the West had been annihilated. For the Allies, the cost was staggering as well, over 75,000 casualties. Entire towns obliterated, and vast tracts of Belgium turned to ruins. Yet the psychological balance of the war had shifted irreversibly. The Germans had gambled everything, on surprise, on weather, on faith, and lost. In the days that followed, Allied commanders toured the battlefield. Eisenhower stood over the wreckage of burnt panzers and noted quietly to his staff, "They believed the fog would save them. Instead, it blinded them. In the forests, as snow began to fall again, soldiers from both sides stumbled upon the frozen remains of those who had vanished into the fog days earlier. Patrols lost, medics missing, entire squads entombed in white silence. The Ardennes was once again quiet. But the fog that had rolled through those hills left more than destruction behind. It left a legend of misjudgment, of human blindness amid natural power. For the German command, it was the end of initiative on the Western Front. Never again would the Wehrmacht mount an offensive of that scale. The fog had been their last ally, their last illusion, and it had turned against them. The battle was over, but its consequences, military, psychological, and moral, were only beginning to unfold. The Ardennes lay silent once more. The thunder of engines had faded, replaced by the creak of melting snow dripping from shattered trees. Villages that had been nothing more than names on a staff map were now blackened shells. La Gleize, Stavelot, Houffalize, Bastogne. Their fields littered with burned tanks and twisted trucks half buried in frost. For the Allies, victory came at a terrible cost. Over 75,000 American casualties were recorded. The bloodiest single battle ever fought by U.S. forces in World War II. Entire regiments had been erased from their original strength. Medical tents overflowed with the wounded. Frostbite, trench foot, and exhaustion filled the gaps where bullets had not. Chaplains worked beside surgeons, their prayers competing with the drone of generators and the howl of winter wind. But the Germans had suffered far worse. Hitler's last reserve army, the elite of the Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS, had been gutted. Nearly 80,000 men were lost, dead, missing, or captured. Thousands of vehicles were destroyed or abandoned. Hundreds of tanks lay scattered across the snow like iron carcasses, their frozen crews still inside. Fuel, ammunition, and manpower, resources the Reich could never replace, were gone. The fog that had begun as a veil of opportunity now settled as a shroud. In Berlin, the atmosphere was grim and silent. Reports from the front reached OKW headquarters like funeral notices. Rundstedt's dispatches spoke of untenable positions. Model, commanding Army Group B, requested permission to withdraw before his forces were annihilated. Both men knew the truth. The Ardennes offensive had not delayed the inevitable Allied advance. It had hastened it. But in Hitler's bunker, rage replaced reason. He accused his generals of cowardice, claiming they had failed the miracle offered by weather. He demanded new counterattacks, new sacrifices, still refusing to accept that the fog and surprise that had once favored him no longer existed. Among the surviving troops, morale collapsed. Prisoners captured by the Allies spoke of betrayal, confusion, and despair. "We were told the Americans were weak," one German corporal recalled. But the fog lifted, and suddenly we were surrounded by armor everywhere. It was like the earth itself turned against us. The Allied leadership understood the gravity of what had just occurred. To Eisenhower and his staff, the Ardennes battle was not merely a victory, it was proof of endurance. The U.S. Army had absorbed a massive surprise assault, recovered under chaos, and counterattacked with discipline. For the first time, even the most skeptical Allied leaders, Montgomery among them, acknowledged the raw resilience of American forces under pressure. For the British, the battle reaffirmed the wisdom of maintaining reserve strength. For the Americans, it validated the lessons of flexibility and command decentralization. And for the Germans, it marked the death of strategic initiative in the West. In intelligence briefings that followed, Schaff analysts pieced together the consequences. Germany had committed its last strategic reserves, 10 panzer divisions that could never be rebuilt. The Luftwaffe, crippled by fuel shortages and attrition, had lost hundreds of aircraft in a desperate New Year's counterattack known as Operation Bodenplatte. It was meant to destroy Allied air power on the ground. Instead, it destroyed what remained of the Luftwaffe itself. From this point on, the German war effort in the West existed only in defense and retreat. Yet even amid victory, the human toll hung heavy. Civilians in the Ardennes, Belgian farmers, Luxembourg villagers, emerged from cellars to find their homes obliterated. Fields were mined, wells contaminated, roads lined with the dead. In Bastogne, an American nurse wrote in her diary, "The snow is red, then white again by morning. The fog rises each dawn like ghosts. The fog that had once hidden armies now cloaked the ruins of lives, soldiers and civilians alike." And as the Allies advanced eastward, toward the Siegfried Line and the Rhine, they carried with them the memory of those freezing weeks when the world had vanished into mist, and the line between victory and disaster had been no thicker than the fog itself. In the weeks that followed, the scale of the German defeat became undeniable. By late January 1945, Allied patrols stood once again along the Siegfried Line, the same frontier the Germans had crossed only a month earlier in triumph. But now, the initiative was gone. What had begun as Hitler's final gamble to divide and destroy the Western Allies had ended with the Wehrmacht exhausted, exposed, and broken. The Ardennes offensive, intended to buy time, had instead accelerated collapse. Fuel depots were empty. The Luftwaffe's remaining aircraft sat useless on frozen runways. Trains bringing reinforcements from the east were bombed daily. German soldiers, starving and ill-equipped, retreated through villages reduced to ash. Entire battalions marched barefoot in snow. Others surrendered simply to survive. In February, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt confided privately to a staff officer, "We threw our last dice, and they fell wrong." Even within the Nazi hierarchy, faith had shattered. Model, who had once been known as Hitler's fireman, could no longer rally his forces. Surrounded by the ruins of Army Group B in the Ruhr pocket months later, he would take his own life rather than face capture. In Berlin, Hitler retreated further into delusion. He blamed the failure on cowardice and meteorological sabotage, raging that the weather, once his ally in Poland and France, had betrayed him in the Ardennes. He ordered a scorched earth policy, demanding Germany destroy its own bridges, factories, and towns to deny them to the Allies. His generals obeyed in silence, their loyalty reduced to duty without faith. To the Allied commanders, the fog of the Ardennes came to represent something deeper, the last mirage of Nazi power. The Germans had believed that nature itself could bend to their will, that luck and secrecy could overcome material reality. But when the mist cleared, it revealed the truth. Germany no longer possessed the means, nor the unity, to sustain war. For the Allies, the victory reshaped both confidence and caution. The U.S. Army, having endured the shock of the offensive, emerged hardened and battle-wise. In the coming months, it would cross the Rhine with calculated precision. The British and Canadians advanced steadily from the north. The Soviets, learning of the German defeat in the Ardennes, accelerated their assault from the east, launching the Vistula-Oder offensive in January 1945 that carried them within sight of Berlin in mere weeks. Thus, the fog that once blanketed Belgium also obscured the dawn of Germany's final defeat. For the soldiers who survived, the memories were indelible. They spoke of endless nights under a pale sky, of frozen rifles and silent forests where shadows moved like ghosts. American infantrymen remembered the bitter cold, the smell of pine and cordite, and the strange quiet that came after each artillery barrage. German veterans, years later, recalled the moment they realized the offensive was doomed, when the fog lifted and the horizon filled with Allied armor from every direction. Civilians, too, carried scars invisible to any map. Children returned to find their homes burned, their parents buried under collapsed walls. Farmers unearthed helmets and bones each spring for decades. The Ardennes itself became a living memorial, its forests hiding traces of trenches, its soil mixed forever with the steel and ashes of that winter. In the war's final months, as Allied columns pushed into the heart of Germany, soldiers would sometimes recall that December morning when the world was nothing but fog and silence, when the enemy had seemed unstoppable, when the line between life and death had been measured in yards of mist. They understood then what the battle had truly revealed, that arrogance, not weather, had doomed the German command. The fog had not been a miracle, nor an ally, nor a curse. It had been a mirror, showing each side what it truly was. The Ardennes offensive ended the myth of invincibility that had defined the German army since 1939. And as 1945 unfolded, that same fog would lift across all of Europe, revealing the ruins of an empire built on illusion and the final approach of war's reckoning. The Ardennes, winter of 1944, remains more than a battle. It is a portrait of blindness, not of sight, but of understanding. The fog that cloaked those hills was no accident of nature. It was a symbol of every illusion that had sustained the German war machine. Faith in destiny, in superiority, in the belief that sheer will could bend the world to command. For one brief moment, that fog gave them hope. And for one brief moment, it seemed to work. Tanks moved unseen. Divisions advanced unnoticed. Surprise was complete. But in war, nature favors no one. When the fog lifted, so did illusion. The same mist that once hid victory revealed ruin. The same silence that promised control became the echo of collapse. History would remember the Battle of the Bulge as the last great German offensive, a desperate strike against time itself. But beneath the statistics, beneath the movements of divisions and the clash of steel, there lies a quieter truth. Arrogance is the most fragile weapon of all. For the soldiers who fought there, in foxholes filled with snow, in forests where visibility was measured in inches, the fog was not metaphor, but memory. It was the feel of frost-bitten hands gripping rifles, the confusion of direction, the waiting for dawn that never seemed to come. To them, the war was not strategy or ideology. It was weather. It was survival. When the clouds finally broke and sunlight touched the ruined trees of Bastogne, the world had changed. Germany's fate was sealed. The road to the Rhine lay open, and beyond it, the end of the Reich. In the end, the fog gave no favor, no omen, no warning. It only reflected what was already true, that even the mightiest armies can lose their way when they mistake chance for control. And so, the Ardennes remains silent today. The forests have grown back. The snow melts each spring, but beneath the soil, iron still sleeps. Reminders of a winter when men vanished into the mist, and history itself waited, unseen, for the moment the fog would finally lift.